So we ready to get started? Is that a yes? So,
it's good to be used to maraming tao tapos by yourself. I was I was in college.
Go sit down. So, I don't know if anybody got my demonstration. So I pattern on it. Yeah, it's like an old dodgeball.
I just got new context so I can see it in there. But I went concentrate.
So I was playing ball with Zoe. I took it away from her, and then I played with Maya. Did I do anything wrong? What if Zoe still wanted to play? Would I have done anything wrong? It's my ball.
I can choose who I want to play with.
I should be able to choose with who I want to play with. I'm done playing with her. I'm going to play with her. Right? So keep that in your mind. I'm going to come back to that.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about Old Testament problems. And there are so many that they'll throw at us. Anybody think of any?
Genocide.
Genocide.
Like offering of your child to sacrifice and
Oh man, they throw them in the skillets and cook them.
what do you call this? Slavery. They usually throw that at you.
Okay, so I want us to keep in mind what I just said about
In taking the land from people.
the land. So
Well, they throw them in jail when they had a fine and they couldn't pay it, so they throw them in jail.
Well, that's true.
How's that going to help them? Because they're in jail, they
of
can't.
course, that's a Talmud issue. That's not a biblical thing. But
Or like approving of killing a particular
genocide.
yeah.
Genocide. Or telling people to go kill anybody. That sounds like murder, right?
Yeah.
From our perspectives.
The person killed this couple, and then God said, "I approve that."
Even the keeping of slaves.
Keeping the slaves. Exactly.
Slavery.
So what I was trying to demonstrate with the ball was, it's mine. Okay? I own it. So I can use it any way I want, and I can choose to share it with anyone I want to. Does God own anything?
He owns everything.
Everything.
So when it comes down to the land issue, and this is one you'll hear a lot, I love the way Phil Vischer, the Veggie Tales guy, in his series Buck Denver and What's Through the Bible with Buck Denver. He has what he calls the tricky bits in the Bible, things that are complicated to address, and they're always talking, well, why did God take the land away from the Canaanites and give it to the Jews?
It's not.
It's his land. That's exactly right, Alfred. Beyond the other issues, which obviously they were being punished for the things that they had done, in the end, it's God's land. He can choose to give it to anybody he wants. It's not unjust because he owns it. He actually gets to choose. And if you know, how far back do you want to go? Who actually has the right to the land? Well, in the end, it comes down to the Creator. So the land one is kind of a bit of a mute issue. But the big ones that people will talk about are the genocide, the slavery, and the murder. Does the Bible condone these things in the Old Testament? And believe it or not, there are Christians that will say yes to that question. Okay? Not very wise Christians, but there are Christians who will say, yeah, the Old Testament, God condones these behaviors. So the question we have to figure out is, how are we going to address this? Because this is an atheist's favorite, or non-believers for sure. That Old Testament, I can kind of get Jesus, he loves me, but I can't accept the Old Testament. You have to accept the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the foundations of our faith. Without the Old Testament, we don't understand the character of God. It sets the foundation for Jesus. So we have to address these problems. First is genocide, and that is artist's depiction of an idol of Moloch. I don't know if you notice the fire underneath the little skillet and the father putting the baby on the skillet. And the Canaanites, especially the Amorites, were big about sacrificing their children to the...
Get that. My son might make me mad on a red hornet sometime, and I just, but I couldn't throw him on there.
What was crazy is they were told that this is like a act that would give them more fertility and more, it's like, I don't get it. I've read some of the historical accounts of what they think the worship was like, and this one is trying to kind of depict it as they're musicians, and they would be pounding drums. It would be really loud so they couldn't hear the child screeching as they shriveled up and died on the frying pan. But that's what the people in the land of Canaan were doing in the time of Abraham all the way up until Joshua brought the Israelites into the promised land. So God owns the land. We talked about that already. He has the right to judge and punish people for evil. And the people that were in the land before the Israelites got there were doing detestable things. God has a right to punish them.
Well, this is the fact that the question typically from non-believers would be like, well, your God told the Israelites to kill everybody in this land.
Women and
That's
children.
genocide.
Women and children.
Everybody.
Kill everybody. Women and children. What about the kids? What about the innocents? What about the women didn't do anything? Why would God endorse and actually tell them to do complete genocide, killing the women and the children, even the livestock in some cases? Can we justify that under the judgment and punishment part?
Most of the women were just as idolatrous as the men.
Well, that's true.
About the children.
What happens if they're not killed? This is a question you got to ask yourself. Okay, if the Jews or Israelites came in and killed all the men and all the women and just left the kids there, what happens to the children?
Well, what about this question? What about Noah's time? Everybody was killed.
Very true, but we can apply that the same way. Everybody was killed.
And God did it. It's not that
Yep.
He told a group of people to kill all this.
Yeah, I mean the flood.
God did.
The flood would be equally applicable to what we're talking about here.
God did it.
So he didn't want that all this time.
But those innocents is what you always hear. Children never had that chance to have their life.
They're gonna grow up and they're gonna.
Well, is life that great? This is what you got to kind of ask yourself. Death is mercy in many cases. I mean, would you rather that child was a slave for the rest of their life, or was left to be eaten by wild animals, or just exposure and die slowly?
Or become a bad person.
Or become a bad person?
And take revenge and they're gonna.
There are more problems.
Well, and if you believe in the age of accountability, those children are in heaven. Is that better for them to be in heaven, or better for them to have lived a bad life?
Well, if they're grown up and they've learned what their parents
In this culture,
they're taught what their parents
Yeah.
did. That's what they're
gonna
going to
do.
learn what they live.
Yes.
That's right.
so yes, God initiates what we would call genocide in the Bible, but it's not evil; it's punishment on a culture that deserves punishment. He has the right to give the land to anybody he wants, and the children, if they are truly innocent, it's mercy for them to be killed. And American culture has trouble with death, I understand, but death can be mercy. I mean, like
But in Old Testament, Jeroboam, was that Jeroboam, Joy?
Yep.
Yeah.
Jeroboam.
Yeah, Jeroboam.
Everybody was bad. So God said, I will take that child away, like kill the child, like it's gonna die. Because that's the only good
thing in the house
your
of Rehoboam.
family. So all of you're gonna get killed in a horrible way, and this child is gonna be buried, and because I'm taking him because of, he's the only good thing in your house.
Yeah, so God takes the child by disease or whatever, sickness. And that's actually mercy. The child doesn't have to, he's the good, so I'm taking the good out. Actually, the other places, when the Babylonians came in, the righteous people were killed. Well, why were they killed? Well, they didn't have to endure what was going to happen afterwards. Death is not always...
Or the one that got sent to exile. Those are the ones that I'm preserving.
Yeah, the remnant is going to be part of the exiles, right? So our perception is not necessarily God's perception. And we need to recognize that He has the right to do this. This is not... It's not a bad thing because God says it's not a bad thing.
And one thing is, God has covenant to Israel, and that's a form of preservation of the race of Israel. And that is His sovereign doing.
Yeah.
To start with, He gave life. He can take life. He has the right to do that. Whether you like it or not. You don't like it, but God gives you life. He can take your life. If you're 80 or you're 1 year old, He has the right to do that.
Well, and He has...
For whatever
People
reason.
that don't agree, they would disagree and say, that's not a just God, that's a mean
Well,
God.
what about you killing your own baby?
Yeah.
It's like you think it's a moral, like, you didn't make that baby. Why do you think when God does, get somebody's life, you think it's immoral, but when you do it to yourself, you do it,
Well,
you're moral.
yeah, moral outrage is always, I always find a little interesting. It's like, you don't really, the person could die from a regular accident. Do you consider that a moral outrage? Does the way they die change the moral outrage of the death? It shouldn't. And Julmar's right. I mean, I can't remember which prophet it was wanting the Israelites to be punished, the northern kingdom. And then God told him He's going to bring in the Assyrians to do it. And he's like, oh no, they're more wicked than we are. But
That's Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, that's right. And Habakkuk, that's right. So God can use bad things to do His purposes. And that doesn't make His purposes wrong. The fact the people that conduct it might do something that's atrocious. But the purpose is to carry out His purposes and His will.
There's another story in Old Testament where Moses, that guy that hide the treasure that were supposed to be
Korah.
Yeah. No.
It's Korah. Yeah, the sons of
Korah.
In Joshua's time.
Who-
And then
isn't-
the
I don't remember.
The
Yeah, that's the sons of Korah.
what do you call
Sons
it?
of Korah got sacked because they...
No, it's not zapping. The ground opened up and swallowed the whole family.
Yeah, the whole family.
The whole family got buried.
That's a good one. That's good homework for us to go back and see who that is.
Korah did.
What?
That's Korah.
Korah.
But their sin was they burned the incense, they did it wrong, the way they burned the incense.
I don't remember, but
I'm mixing.
the whole point is
But
God's
light
judgment.
opened and the whole family got buried, got
Yeah.
swallowed by the ground.
Including the children and the women and
And I've been like grappling with this. It's like, that's not fair. It's like, it's the father that did something. Why the whole family, it was included on the punishment? Now I think, I talked to Joy and it's like, and then we come to realize, it's like, well, if only the father, imagine, if only the father was punished and the kids and the wife, who's going to take care of them? And this family is going to have that bad reputation. Oh, that's the kid of the guy
of that guy, right?
did something bad and got punished. Growing up like that, which one is better?
Well,
If you didn't do anything, you're going to go with God. You're going to go to heaven. You're going to go to paradise.
if we believe in heaven and that's the route to heaven, I take the route.
It's like, that's the
Okay,
worst.
whatever that route is, sign me up.
You're going to have, oh, that's the son of so-and-so. The one that got
Said the sins of the father carries over.
Yeah.
bad
Yep.
reputation. Bad reputation. They're going to like,
Yep.
oh, you're going to...
You're going to pay the consequences even if you haven't done it. That doesn't make you evil, but you have to face the
Which,
consequences.
then it's mercy.
Yep.
It's mercy from God.
And God dealt with people in families, as family units and as tribes too.
Well, because that's how the culture viewed them, right?
Yeah, that's how they,
You're the son of
yes.
whatever. So it may not be very pleasing, but when you talk about the genocide argument, the problem of genocide and killing and all these things in the Old Testament, you've got to recognize that God has the right to judge. And it's not about death. Like I said, if he caused them all to pass out because of lack of oxygen, you wouldn't call it evil. I mean, it's just normal, right? That's how people die. While it may not be satisfying for some, this is not a problem with the Old Testament. It is telling us the character of God and that there's consequences for bad behavior. What about slavery? Now, this is one that obviously in our culture is a sore subject.
But slavery was there everywhere.
And there was different kinds of slavery, and that's what we're not always aware of. This is actually a depiction that was found in Thebes in Egypt, which shows both Nubian or black Africans and what appear to be Hebrew slaves. It doesn't date to the time of the Israelites in Egypt. It comes after. Actually, it comes during a period of time where the Pharaoh raided the Canaan lands to try to replenish his slave.
Solomon had slaves. I never even thought about Solomon having slaves.
Yep. Slaves were very normal in the culture. Now, we got to understand there's a couple reasons for this, though. I'm not condoning slavery. I'm not trying to say that. But if it's death or slavery, what's the choice? There's no social services. People would sell themselves into slavery as a means to survive. And the slave owner was, especially within the Hebrew culture, was required to provide for them and to treat them fairly. If they were a fellow Jew, they were supposed to be released 7 years.
7 years.
Right? So it wasn't permanent. Now, they could choose to be a permanent slave by choosing for themselves. So slavery, our depiction of slavery and what the Bible depicts is somewhat different when we talk about what God is condoning in the Pentateuch. Now, there's bad slave owners, and there's so many stories in the New Testament that address how we as Christians, if we were in that position as a slave, should act toward our...
Even in Old Testament, there's provisions on how you would treat the slave.
You're supposed to treat them with dignity.
Whatever you want.
Because, like I said, it's slavery or death in this generation. That's just the way it was. If they couldn't find someone that would take them on as a worker, they were just going to die. So we have to recognize that. And then whatever kind of service we're in, as Christians, we know we're supposed to do that service as if we're working for Christ. And yeah, slavery, I would not ever condone another human owning another human. But as far as being responsible to other human, we're all responsible to other humans. You know, I've worked for many a person in my life and felt they were slave masters, even though they were my... I think if we apply what we saw in the brutality of like American slavery to what the Old Testament is talking about, I think that is, you're talking cross purposes. You're not talking about the same thing. I don't think the Bible condones owning another human. It's treating another human with dignity. And in the time period where the Old Testament was written, this is how you treated them with dignity, is you gave them a means. In fact, in the story of Abraham, he had a servant or slave named Eleazar who was going to inherit his house as a slave. Well, that sounds like a pretty good relationship, right? I mean...
Eliezer is going to get everything.
Now, there's obviously bad cases.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't have to be a slave to be abused by somebody in power. So I think, unfortunately, the slavery thing is overblown because of our cultural baggage. And that's not what the Bible is talking about at all.
No, I said Philemon.
Oh, Philemon, yes.
Philemon, he ran away.
Onesimus.
Onesimus.
I cannot pronounce names. Onesimus, yes.
Onesimus.
I still remember we're at a pastor and he, Onesiphorus.
I know, we was like...
It's like, what is that? Who's Onesiphorus?
I never heard.
And the guy never looked up how to pronounce the word, right? And was preaching and calling it Onesiphorus, and it's Onesimus. I was like, yeah, Oniferous.
Gary's the one that says
Onesimus. So, whatever. Okay, so genocide, slavery, we may not be happy about, but there are reasons why it's depicted the way in the Bible. And it's too bad Eric and Chris aren't here. Murder is the one. Does God endorse murder? Beyond the genocide, the one-on-one cases. Well, wars are not murder, right? Even modernly, I don't think we'd accuse our soldiers of committing murder when they're doing war. War can do evil things, but the act itself it's not premeditated. You don't know the person and intend to kill them because of who they are. It's not really murder, but people will try to call it murder. And God told them to go do all these battles and kill all these people, and 130,000 people die here and 200,000 die here, and wipe them out. These are often historical accounts. Not everything in the Bible is a God directive. And that's one thing that Bible skeptics don't always get, is these stories are telling us what happened. And often God says this and then the people do that. You can't blame God for the things that people chose to do that were outside of His will. And we have to be able to identify those. So again, I think it's really important to make sure that we are identifying what their specific question is before we try to address it. Because if you address it in like a global manner, you can miss the point that they're really struggling with. And then reality is, there's a punishment for killing people in the Bible. You read the Pentateuch. Murder is one of the 10 Commandments. And God has a very strong stance on killing somebody, purposely killing somebody with a malice, right?
It's life for life.
And even incidental killings is addressed in the Bible, right? So there are punishments for these things. So it's not like God is endorsing it. Those specific cases that people want to jump on are, it's just sad that they pick up on things that are not. Just because it's in the Bible does not mean God has endorsed it. And I think,
like example, during the judge time, the guy that says, if I win the battle, whoever comes out of the door,
Jephthah.
I'm going to offer. And God did not tell him to do that. He did it himself.
yep.
He's not endorsing that.
Or Samson. I mean, talk about not a very good guy, but God used him even though he wasn't a very good guy. I even think of Gideon. Gideon tested God twice, and I don't think you were meant to test God in that way, yet God still used him.
No, I think we did.
Another example of that, you just read the judgment on Babylon. If you read a Babylonian judgment of God, God tells him, it's like, this, you're being judged because I used you to judge Judah, Israel, but you went too far. You went too far.
Yeah.
And now you're going to be judged.
Yeah. So again, we've got to drill down, figure out what the specific issue someone has, and then open it up and look at it in context. And I think usually the context will reveal. And just because it's in the Bible does not mean God endorsed the behavior. He definitely didn't tell David to go have an adulterous relationship with Bathsheba, with Uriah's wife, the one who may not be spoken of.
And made a plan to kill the husband.
Yes, and made a plan to kill the husband. I mean, those are all things, and David was punished for that in the story. So God obviously was not endorsing that behavior. And I think most skeptics aren't willing to read for the context. They're looking for the soundbite. So we have to pull them back to the context when they try to give us a soundbite as their argument. Agreed?
It's still amazing how God, even though David took took Bathsheba from Uriah and Solomon, the son is one of the descendants of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, had all the women and the concubines and all stuff, but still.
Yeah, for a wise guy, he wasn't very wise.
No, he wasn't.
Okay.